In kayaking, there is a moment that only those who have truly ventured far from shore know, when there is no turning back, when the depth beneath you is measured in miles, and the only sound is the creak of the kayak and your own heartbeat, when every decision becomes a matter of survival, and a simple sleeping capsule turns into a claustrophobic coffin. It is at moments like these that stories are born, stories that are later whispered about, stories about the limits of human capabilities and that invisible line beyond which dreams turn into recklessness. The Tasman Sea stretches between Australia and New Zealand as one of the harshest water barriers in the world. Covering an area of about 1 million square miles, it is known for its unpredictable currents, strong winds, and waves that can reach 30 feet in height. Sailors have nicknamed this part of the Southern Ocean the Roaring Forties because of the fierce storms that form at these latitudes, unopposed by land. In the early 2000s, sea kayaking in Australia remained a niche hobby. Few dared to venture beyond coastal waters in fragile vessels, relying solely on their own muscle power. Crossing the Tasman Sea by kayak seemed unthinkable. The 620-mile distance between the shores of Tasmania and Milford Sound in New Zealand meant a month of solo sailing through some of the most dangerous waters on the planet. Here, the water temperature rarely rises above 59 degrees Celsius, and the weather changes at an alarming rate. The ocean can be calm in the morning and turn into a boiling cauldron by noon. The currents of the Tasman Sea are treacherous companions, capable of both helping and carrying travelers away from their intended route. The so-called killer waves are particularly dangerous, a rare phenomenon when a wave suddenly reaches extreme heights due to the combination of currents and wind, capable of capsizing even a well-prepared vessel. Despite all its dangers, the Tasman Sea captivates with its pristine beauty. On rare calm days, its waters take on a deep blue color, merging with the horizon. At night, far from the coast and light pollution, the stars are reflected in the water, creating the sensation of floating through space. This duality, deadly danger and breathtaking beauty, makes the Tasman Sea the perfect test for those who seek to test the limits of human ability. In 2007, no one had yet crossed the Tasman Sea in a kayak. It was the last great maritime challenge waiting to be conquered. A man who would dare to prove that the impossible is possible. Andrew McAuley couldn't imagine a life without adventure. Born on August 7, 1968, in Goulburn, New South Wales, he showed fearlessness and a thirst for exploration from an early age. Together with his brother Michael, they swam, climbed trees, and jumped off cliffs, training themselves in what would later become his defining trait, the ability to overcome fear. In his youth, Andrew traveled extensively, conquering mountain peaks in Australia, New Zealand, and Patagonia. It was in Patagonia that fate changed the course of his life. During a climbing expedition, he fell 42 feet and broke his kneecap. The injury limited his climbing abilities, but opened new doors. During one of his expeditions to Patagonia, Andrew became seriously interested in kayaking for the first time. He discovered that even in harsh weather, a kayak allowed him to move forward when other modes of transportation were impossible. This discovery changed his perspective, opening up new horizons of adventure. Back in Australia, he immersed himself in his new passion. Kayaking became more than just a sport for him. It was a way to challenge himself, nature, and conventional ideas about what was possible. Methodical and thoughtful, Andrew did not believe in recklessness. Each of his adventures was the result of careful planning and preparation. Vicky came into Andrew's life. She was just as passionate about adventure, a climber and kayaker. Together, they spent their days on the water, learning about currents and paddling techniques. They spent their honeymoon kayaking in Patagonia. When their son Finley was born in 2003, many thought Andrew would settle down. But fatherhood only added a new dimension to his motivation. Andrew often talked about Finley in his video diaries. It was important to him not just to accomplish feats, but to inspire his son. He wanted to be an example of someone who wasn't afraid to follow his dreams, no matter how incredible they seemed. By the time Andrew had formed the idea of crossing the Tasman Sea, He already had some impressive achievements under his belt. In 2003, he became the first person to make a non-stop crossing of Bass Strait between mainland Australia and Tasmania. The 136-mile journey took 35 hours of continuous paddling. A year later, he covered 330 miles across Carpentaria Bay in northern Australia in a week, experiencing for the first time what it was like to sleep in a kayak in the open sea. For these and other outstanding achievements, the Australian Geographical Society awarded Andrew the title of Adventurer of the Year in 2005. But for him, these achievements were just steps towards something greater. For Andrew, the Tasman Sea became the kayaking equivalent of Everest, the last frontier. His philosophy echoed that of writer André Gide, who believed that true discovery requires the courage to leave behind everything familiar and safe. He was convinced that sometimes you have to let go of the shore to truly discover new horizons. Preparations for the expedition across the Tasman Sea took almost 10 years. Andrew studied meteorological data, consulted with scientists, and researched currents and winds. He left nothing to chance. Funding the expedition required tens of thousands of dollars from sponsors, equipment manufacturers, and private donors who believed in his dream. The kayak itself, named Kayak 1, was a key element. Created in collaboration with engineers, this 19-foot vessel was equipped with a special capsule called Casper, where Andrew could sleep in relative safety. The interior of the capsule was cramped, resembling a cocoon, and was intended for short periods of rest when the ocean allowed for a breather. A drawback of the design was that the capsule tended to fill with water when folded, which increased the weight of the kayak and made it difficult to recover after capsizing. Vicky was actively involved in the preparations, helping to test the kayak and plan the route. She shared Andrew's passion for adventure, but had mixed feelings about the Tasman Sea. In private conversations with friends, she admitted that his dream was an integral part of his personality. Stopping Andrew would mean changing his very essence, depriving him of the air he needed to live. In December 2006, Andrew made his first attempt to cross, but was forced to return due to severe hypothermia. This retreat was not a defeat. Rather, it was a sign of his rational approach to risk. He knew when to retreat in order to return and try again. On January 11, 2007, after additional preparation and modifications to the kayak, Andrew was ready for another attempt. A small group of loved ones gathered on the beach in Tasmania, Vicky with 3-year-old Finley in her arms, members of the support team, and a few kayaker friends. The moment of farewell was quiet and emotional. Vicky hugged her husband tightly, trying to remember the feel of his arms. Andrew picked up Finley and looked long and hard into his son's eyes, telling him how much he loved him. This farewell was captured on video and later became part of a documentary film about his journey. Andrew loaded the last supplies, a month's worth of food, a seawater desalinator, a satellite phone, and a camera to document the journey. His face showed the determination of a man ready to step beyond the known. The first strokes of the oars cut through the smooth morning water. The kayak slowly moved away from the shore, becoming smaller and smaller against the vast sea. Vicky stood holding Finley in her arms until Andrew's silhouette disappeared on the horizon. The journey that would change perceptions of human capabilities and leave an indelible mark on the history of extreme adventure had begun. The first few days in the Tasman Sea proved to be a severe test of Andrew McAuley's technique, equipment, and determination. His white kayak, visible against the dark blue waters, covered 35 miles a day, a good pace considering the conditions. From the Tasmanian coast, he set a course northeast, using the hydrodynamics of Cape Eddystone to catch favorable currents. Life in the kayak was extremely minimalist. 19 feet long and just over 5 feet wide, it was his entire world for the next month. Every inch counted. The space was engineered with precision. A compartment for food and water, a place for his satellite phone, navigation equipment, and his few personal belongings. The daily routine was strict. Wake up at dawn, Row for about 14 hours with minimal breaks, and at dusk, close the Casper capsule to rest. While underway, he periodically contacted his support team to relay his coordinates and receive weather forecasts. At night, when he wasn't paddling, Andrew recorded a video diary, his only companion in this endless space. On the third day, the water temperature dropped to 53.6 degrees Ralph. Salt spray constantly got inside the kayak, creating a feeling of damp cold that even a high-tech dry suit couldn't protect him from. Despite his gloves, Andrew's hands were covered with cracks and blisters. The salt water turned every microscopic wound into a source of burning pain. By the end of the first week, Andrew was already deep at sea, beyond the rescue zones accessible for rapid response. The Australian and New Zealand Coast Guards were still tracking his progress, but the kayak had long since disappeared from the radar horizon. In the event of an emergency, help might come too late. 10 days into the journey, meteorologist Jonathan Borge, who was working with Andrew's support team, noticed an alarming low-pressure system forming south of his course. This news was relayed to Andrew during his next communications session. A storm was approaching with winds of up to 40 knots, which at sea meant waves up to 30 feet high. A typical vessel would have chosen to change course to avoid such weather, but the kayaker did not have the speed necessary to maneuver. Andrew decided to continue, but increased the frequency of equipment checks and capsule reinforcement. When the storm caught up with him a few hundred miles off the Australian coast, conditions deteriorated to extreme levels in a matter of hours. The dark gray sky seemed to descend to the water's surface. Visibility was reduced to a few feet. Waves rose around him like shifting mountains. The first capsize occurred about 4 hours after the storm began. The kayak performed a complete barrel roll, a term for a complete flip of the boat over its bow. In such a situation, survival depended on the skills of an Eskimo roll, a technique that allows a kayak to be turned back to its normal position without getting out of it. Andrew successfully performed the maneuver, but the storm only intensified. Over the next few hours, the kayak capsized several more times. After another capsize, the Casper capsule began to fill with water, a problem he had feared so much. With the capsule filled with water, the kayak became 330 pounds heavier, which made maneuvering extremely difficult. Realizing that it was pointless to fight the elements, Andrew made the difficult but only correct decision to fold his paddle and seal the capsule, surrendering himself to the ocean. He spent the next 28 hours inside the cramped capsule, barely able to change position, feeling every wave and the kayak's rotation. The darkness inside the capsule added to his disorientation. He periodically pumped out water, but most of the time he just waited, conserving his energy. When the storm finally subsided, Andrew's body was racked with cramps from being in the same position for so long. His face ached from the salt that was impossible to wash off. But the worst news came when he checked his equipment. His backup satellite phone and tracking beacon were damaged. Now his only link to the world was his main satellite phone. After the storm, Andrew sent a brief message to meteorologist Borg. "No picnic today," an understated expression that reflected his ability to remain calm even in extreme situations. By the middle of the third week of the journey, physical exhaustion began to affect Andrew's psychological state. The monotony of the endless ocean, the lack of human contact, and the constant physical strain created a heavy emotional burden. The days merged together. His hands automatically performed the rowing movements, which had become a form of meditation. The ocean around him changed its character, sometimes calm, almost friendly, at times fierce and deadly, but always beautiful in its indifference to human aspirations. Andrew began to notice strange things. Sometimes he thought he saw another boat nearby. He could clearly see its silhouette and hear the splash of oars. The rational part of his mind understood that these were hallucinations caused by fatigue and loneliness, but the images were so real that it became increasingly difficult to ignore them. At night, huddled in the cramped capsule, he talked to Vicky and Finley as if they could hear him. He told them about the stars that hung over the ocean brighter than he had ever seen them on land. about the phosphorescent plankton that sometimes lit up in the darkness around the kayak, creating the impression of swimming through the stars, about the dolphins that once accompanied him for several hours, jumping and diving alongside the kayak, as if welcoming a rare guest to their world. In moments of extreme fatigue, Andrew's thoughts returned to the question he had been pushing away from the beginning. Was it worth it? Had he done the right thing in leaving Vicky and 3-year-old Finley for this journey? What would be left after him if the ocean prevailed? Guilt gave way to determination, then returned again, an endless cycle as constant as the rhythm of the waves. The dangerous proximity of the shore began to manifest itself in the second half of the journey. The New Zealand mountains, barely visible on the horizon, created their own weather systems. Unexpected winds coming down from the mountains could catch even an experienced sailor off guard. After 25 days at sea, Andrew often gazed into the distance, trying to make out the contours of land, but the mountains of New Zealand remained a ghostly mirage, appearing and disappearing in the haze of the horizon. By the end of January, Andrew had covered 2/3 of the distance. Despite all the trials, his progress was steady. The Kayak One proved to be a reliable vessel, although the problem with water filling the Casper capsule was becoming increasingly serious. After each storm, Andrew had to bail out up to 30 gallons of water, and this monotonous work sapped energy that could have been used to move forward. February 8th was the day when hope turned into near certainty. The mountains of New Zealand first appeared clearly on the horizon. From a distance of about 75 miles from Milford Sound, Andrew sent an optimistic message to Vicky. "See you 9 a.m. Sunday." His GPS coordinates showed that if he maintained his current pace, he would reach New Zealand in a day and a half. On the same day, Andrew took a photo that would later become a symbol of his journey. It shows him against the horizon, his face tired but determined. His eyes are looking straight at the camera, the gaze of a man who has gone through unimaginable hardships and can see the finish line. The alternating feelings of exhaustion and euphoria made the last days of the journey particularly tense. Despite the proximity of his goal, Andrew remained focused and cautious. 28 days at sea had taught him that the ocean can be especially dangerous when victory seems close, when fatigue accumulates and attention dulls as the finish line approaches. On the evening of February 8th, after a month at sea, Andrew folded up the Casper capsule for the last time for a night's rest. The mountains of New Zealand were already clearly visible on the horizon. He fell asleep thinking that he would spend the next night on solid ground. No one knew that the sea had one more final test in store for him. A test that would test not only his skills and endurance, but his very will to live. February 9th, 2007, began as a day of triumph for Andrew McCoy. After 29 days at sea, covering more than 900 miles, he was only 18 miles from his cherished goal, Milford Sound, a fjord on the southwestern coast of New Zealand. The weather that morning was relatively calm. The waves were no higher than 16 feet, and the wind was around 20 knots, normal conditions for these waters. There was no sign of trouble. Throughout the day, Andrew maintained a steady rowing pace, hoping to reach shore by evening or, at the latest, by the next morning. The distance he had left to cover was less than what he had covered in a day at the beginning of his journey, but a month at sea had changed his physical condition. His hands, covered with calluses and abrasions, no longer moved with the same confidence. His body, despite all its training, felt the accumulated fatigue of thousands of strokes and sleepless nights. What happened next can only be reconstructed from indirect evidence. At around 8 p.m. local time, the New Zealand Coast Guard received a weak radio signal. Andrew's voice, distorted by interference, came through the airwaves with a desperate message. "Emergency! I'm in a kayak, about 18 miles off Milford Sound. I need to be rescued. My kayak is sinking. I'm going down." The officer asked him to repeat the message, but the connection was lost. That was the last time the world heard Andrew McColl's voice. Weather data for February 9th showed no serious storms in the area, but experts later speculated that Andrew may have encountered a so-called killer wave, a rare phenomenon in which a wave suddenly reaches extreme heights due to the combination of currents and wind. Such waves appear out of nowhere and disappear just as suddenly, leaving only chaos in their wake. The response to the distress signal was immediate. New Zealand authorities responsible for maritime safety and rescue coordination took charge of the search and rescue operation. They launched a large-scale search operation covering 15,000 square miles in the waters around Milford Sound. 2 planes and several helicopters took part in the operation, despite difficult weather conditions, 30-knot winds and waves up to 10 feet high. Vicky McAuley, who learned of the distress signal late on February 9th, refused to believe the worst. With little Finley in her arms, she waited for news, clinging to the hope that Andrew, who had so often emerged victorious from battles with the elements, would do so again. The search continued throughout the night, but it was not until the evening of February 10th, around 10 p.m., that a rescue plane spotted the capsized kayak drifting 35 miles from Milford Sound. The Casper capsule was missing, and the attachment point was damaged. Andrew's food and personal belongings remained in the compartment, ruling out the possibility that he had voluntarily abandoned the kayak. The discovery of the kayak without Andrew was a grim sign, but the search continued with even greater intensity. Rescuers knew that a person could survive for several hours in a life jacket in water at a temperature of 59 degrees South. After 70 hours of continuous searching, with no sign of Andrew, the operation was officially called off on February 12th. Peter Williams, Deputy Director of the Coast Guard, made a statement. Given the time spent in the water and the lack of any signs of survival, it is with a heavy heart that we have suspended the air search. Upon examining the kayak, rescuers found Andrew's camera. The memory card was removed, and the footage from the last days of his journey became invaluable evidence of his struggle and determination to reach his goal. The news of Andrew McColl's disappearance deeply shocked not only his loved ones, but also the entire community of kayakers and adventurers around the world. A man who was so close to becoming the first person to cross the Tasman Sea by kayak disappeared just a few hours from shore. On February 27, 2007, Vicky organized a memorial service at the lighthouse in Sydney. The location was chosen for a reason. The lighthouse symbolized Andrew's light, his ability to light the way for others. About 500 people attended the service, including family, friends, and kayakers who admired his achievements. During the ceremony, Vicky played Andrew's last video recording, in which he described the storm and his doubts, but also his hope of seeing New Zealand. These images brought many of those present to tears, seeing the human side of the hero, his vulnerability and strength. "You taught me how to live, Aunt," Vicky said, using Andrew's nickname. She spoke about how his passion for life inspired everyone around him, how his pursuit of the impossible pushed the boundaries of what people thought was achievable. Andrew's father, Peter McAuley, his brother Michael, and his sister Juliet were also present at the service. Peter spoke proudly of his son, who had lived by his own rules and followed his dreams, no matter how incredible they seemed. "He lived the way he wanted to, and we respect that," he said, reflecting the support the family had always given Andrew in his pursuits. Andrew's story sparked controversy in the community. Some admired his courage and spirit of adventure, while others criticized him for taking risks that left his family without a father and husband. This debate reflected the eternal question of where the line between heroism and recklessness lies, and the price a person is willing to pay for their dreams. Vicky herself never blamed Andrew for his decision. She understood that his passion for adventure was part of who he was, what made him who he was. In the years that followed, she devoted herself to raising Finley, telling him about his father not as a tragic figure, but as a man who was not afraid to follow his dreams. Andrew McColl's story did not end with his disappearance. On the contrary, His attempt to cross the Tasman Sea became a turning point in the history of kayaking and extreme travel. In 2008, less than a year after Andrew's disappearance, Australians James Casterson and Justin Jones became the first people to successfully cross the Tasman Sea in a kayak. They used a two-seater vessel, which gave them an advantage in terms of stability and the ability to take turns paddling. Their kayak was equipped with an improved version of the capsule, taking into account design flaws in the Casper. Castricioni and Jones openly acknowledged that their success would not have been possible without the experience of Andrew, who paved the way. 10 years later, in 2018, New Zealander Scott Donaldson became the first person to cross the Tasman Sea solo in a kayak. His vessel had a watertight cabin specially designed to address the problems Andrew had encountered. Donaldson dedicated his achievement to McAuley's memory, saying that it was his attempt that showed that such a crossing was possible. Andrew's tragedy also led to significant improvements in safety standards for extreme kayakers. Kayaking communities introduced strict protocols for ocean expeditions, including mandatory life jackets, backup communication systems, and more thorough planning in conjunction with coastal services. In 2008, a documentary film, Solo, Lost at Sea, was released, telling Andrew's story through his own video recordings and interviews with Vicky, friends, and members of his support team. The film received recognition at film festivals and introduced a wide audience to the life and dreams of this remarkable man. Vicky also wrote a book, Solo, in which she shared the personal side of their relationship and Andrew's philosophy on life. The National Geographic Society posthumously awarded Andrew the title of Adventure of the Year in 2007, recognizing his contribution to exploring the limits of human possibility. But perhaps Andrew McLeod's most important legacy is not his technical innovations or awards, but his philosophy of life. He lived by a quote inspired by André Gide: "No one can discover new oceans unless they dare to lose sight of the shore." This phrase has become a motto for many kayakers and adventure seekers, reminding them that true discovery requires the courage to step outside their comfort zone and safety net. Andrew McAuley's story is a reminder of the fine line that separates grand success from tragedy in the world of extreme achievement. It is the story of a man who chose a short but vibrant life, filled with passion and meaning, over a safe but mundane existence. In his final recordings, Andrew looked straight into the camera, his eyes filled with exhaustion, but also with unwavering determination. He knew he was risking everything for his dream, and although he did not reach the shores of New Zealand physically, his spirit crossed that barrier, inspiring others to follow the horizon, no matter how unattainable the dream may seem. Andrew McAuley's story leaves us with a question that continues to divide society. Should we admire his fearlessness or condemn his choice? Was he a hero who pushed the boundaries of human possibility, or a selfish man who risked his life when he had a 3-year-old son and a loving wife waiting for him at home? Would you prefer to live a safe but predictable life, or a short but bright one, filled with meaning and passion? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. In our next episodes, you'll find more exciting stories about people who walked the fine line between courage and madness. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Take care, and see you in the next episodes.